Hello, I'm your host, Indie Archivist, and welcome to Archives of the Dead Ends. This is a series which features archived files and recorded audio logs that depict the journey of the very individuals who entered, traversed, and even fallen victim to a plane of existence dubbed the Dead Ends. A mysterious realm between reality and fiction, a place, a space, a point in time which can only be described as malevolent and completely mysterious. As we abort this journey, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure you share for more content. Now, just sit back and relax, and let's analyze as we uncover the secrets and unspoken horrifyingly tragedies of the Dead Ends. Episode 1, The Darkest End. March 7th, 2024. Hello, my name is Indy, and I'm the lead archivist over here at Obsidian Research Corporation. I've been required to examine and document any statements in regard to the Brazzers incident back in 2005, October 15th. While a separate team goes and investigates the areas mentioned in these case files, I'm stuck here to either sort it all and validate the claims, or deem the files simply not enough to go on. After interviewing and taking the statements of individuals claiming to have traveled into the dimensions, I'm left with an immense amount of data, and also the need to decipher it all. The amount of statements and audio logs will serve as a reminder that the universe is far more complex and mysterious than we can ever imagine. The first statement we will take is from a man by the name of Jonathan Brazzers. It is believed that this case will be the start of many happenings involving what we are thinking that led to an opening portal domain, the Dead Ends. Statement reads, "Thanks for having me. I'm glad I can speak to someone about all this. Not only did I come for the great compensation that was said to be rewarded for my statement, but I also came for some feeling of relief from the thing that I saw that day, which can only be described as immaculately grotesque. I'm not sure when this all happened exactly, as years have gone by and the specific details begin to fade, but what I can say is that when this all happened several years ago, I was in a very dark place mentally and physically. My wife had passed, and I was laid off my job of almost 16 years. We owned a house near a lake, but it all didn't feel the same anymore after she had died. With only our dog Winston to look after, few little things kept me going, and I didn't seem to have a sense of purpose. To have a house turned from a welcoming environment and then into a place of never-ending purgatory was all too heavy on my soul. I knew I wanted to get out, but the sadness and pain kept me at bay and even anchored to the place. It wasn't until about 7 months that I decided to go out on a hike into the wooded area that neighbored the house for several miles. I felt like I had needed the outdoor solitude anyways, as I was always a nature guy at heart, and appreciated the peace the outdoors can provide. I spent a few days packing for the trip and making sure I had everything prepared. The basic necessities that one would need for a hike. I would also bring my dog Winston to accompany me on the hike, as I figured he could use the getaway as well. Once we were all good to go, we set out for the most longest and enduring hike we had ever had in a long while. The trail was very recognizable as the terrain was all too familiar. However, once dawn had passed and greeted the now dark night sky, I figured it was time to set up camp and just pick it all back up come morning time. Now, I need you to listen to me and listen to me closely, because, the things that I'm about to speak of would forever change the outcome of this hike and my so-called trip of solitude. As I started to set up camp, I noticed a few drops of water on my arm. As the occasional unexpected rain came in, the sky darkened even more as nightfall commenced, but I managed to get the tent up, and then Winston and I went to sleep. I always had trouble falling asleep, but for some reason this night, I don't know if it was the hike, or just how comfortable I was after finally having a chance to get off my feet, but I swiftly fell asleep. A few hours go by, and after a while, I begin to shift in my sleep, and I open my eyes for a brief second, only to notice Winston sitting up and looking forward, as if he was on guard or something. You should have seen him, with his eyes fixed towards the entrance of the tent. I watched him for a couple of minutes, but as my eyes started to close, we both heard a little creak from a branch that sounded like it was close to our tent. My posture froze as Winston looked in the other direction where the sound was coming from, and at that very moment, it was almost like the world stood still, because it was so silent. Not even the wind was blowing, and raindrop sounds on the tent had seemed to slowly disappear. That's when all of a sudden, a huge sound of what bursted like a heavy branch breaking off a tree nearby scared the living shit out of both of us. Then what was followed was an eerie, blood-curdling scream that sounded far off into the woods. Then once the scream faded off into the state of non-existence, the wind and the slight raindrops started again. At that point I wanted to open the tent and take a peek at what was around us, but I couldn't, and ended up cowering to the corner of the tent, and I too slept with one eye opened and was fixed on the entrance of the tent. As the morning approached, the dark gray skylight stained the outside of the tent. I awoke only to be surprised about how dark it still was for it being 8:13 a.m., according to my devices. As I unzipped the tent, Winston watched me, and then a thick fog began to seep in as I opened it more and more and more. To my shock, as I gazed outside, the area looked almost completely different. Tree branches were everywhere, toppled over one another. The ground was now muddy, and to make matters worse, my compass was off, and even spinning no matter what direction I moved towards. Another thing I found absolutely unsettling was that not too far off from the tent, there was an entrance to a structure to what I assumed was a cave, with trees knocked over next to it. The cave didn't seem like it was always there, but almost like it was placed there. From a distance, the fog seemed like it thickened the closer it got to the cave opening. I really can't describe the level of eeriness coming from the looks of the cave. However, just believe me when I say, it was very unsettling. For some weird reason, I don't know what came over me, but whatever did made me want to go take a closer look at this ominous-looking cave. As I ordered Winston to follow me, he stayed close as we walked through the mist, getting closer and closer to the entrance. Once we got there, Winston couldn't proceed any further, and started whining, but nonetheless, I felt the need to get answers for such a phenomena. I walked in, and started to hear my own footsteps echo as I walked past onto the cave floor. The walls of the cave, slick with moisture, felt cold and rough to the touch. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like icicles, while stalagmites rose from the floor, creating an eerie, otherworldly landscape in the dim light coming from the outside. The sound of dripping water echoed throughout the cavernous space, and it was the only sound that was breaking the profound silence. What was strange about all this was, looking into the cave, not a single light emitted inside the cave. It was really hard for any type of vision to take place, and the only light was just the white light indicating the entrance of the cave. For such a pitch-black setting, I didn't seem to run into anything. It was almost like an endless void of space. I kept walking slowly and slowly, not sure as to what I was looking for anymore. And then suddenly, that's when I heard a small faint whisper somewhere into the dark. I stopped dead in my tracks and looked around, but it was of no use considering it was pitch black. Then, scared and frightened as all hell, I shouted back into the void. Who's there? I turned around to make sure the cave entrance light was still behind me, and I began to walk forward. I wondered if my phone flashlight would make the area any brighter, so I shined it, but I still couldn't see a thing. As I kept slowly walking forward, my heart felt like it was beating on the outside of my chest. This went on for a few seconds when all of a sudden, I bumped into a figure that felt like a small humanoid of some sort. After aiming my flashlight at what I bumped into the cold, dark void, I saw a small face of a little girl that began to whisper very faintly and weak, "Help me, please." I jerked back, nearly falling to the ground. The girl looked small and very frail. It definitely appeared as if she hadn't had any food in a while, and the complexion in her skin was extremely pale. She just stood there, with her head looking down. I slowly moved back towards her and I said, "Hey, are you okay? What's your name?" The little girl answered none of my questions, and after about a minute of looking at her, I slowly reached for her hand and said, "Look, we gotta get out of here." Before I can say anything else to the girl, I heard an unsettling whisper of a voice with what sounded like slowly wet footsteps following after say, "Help me." A distant snarl could be heard in front of me. Then, as I was holding the girl, I told her not to let go of my hand as I bolted with her back for the entrance of the cave. As she ran with me, nothing natural was felt as I tugged her along, pulling her. Even still, I just knew we had to get out of that cave. It was then that I noticed a shift that felt like a strange illusion. The cave entrance seemed to have been miles away instead of the initial distance. We ran as whatever was chasing us seemed to be getting closer and closer. Even though the entrance seemed far, I was able to start hearing Winston's continuous barks. The whole experience was like running down a tunnel. It was in that moment that the scariest thing happened that still traumatizes me to this day. As we were running, I couldn't tell what it was, but something cold and wet grabbed my arm near my shoulder and tried to forcefully pull me back into the darkness of the cave. Even now, just thinking about it, I can still feel that cold, wet grasp. We continued to run when finally the cave light smacked us in the face like a blinding light, and we came out of the cave, falling to the ground. Plummeting to the ground, I backed up, looked back at the cave, and then all of a sudden, the wet footsteps, the snarls, the whispers, it all stopped. Beside me lay the small body of the girl who held my arm as we ran nearly for our lives. I picked her up as I realized I didn't want to stick around anymore and wait for anything else. The experience that day traumatized me so much that I didn't even pack up my camping equipment. Winston and I just headed back in the direction we came as I carried the girl who was still passed out in my arms. Later on, I took the girl to the closest hospital as I told them the details about the encounter that involved the girl. After reporting my incident to the police and having my statement taken about the girl and the encounter, I was sent off on my way. Years later, I still don't know about that girl, nor if there have been any encounters like mine. However, I will say this. After telling the police about the location, the cave, and everything about the incident and how it went down, they later told me there was no cave. The only thing in the area was still my camping supplies, and that remains unsettling to me, even to this day. The dead ends. Statement end. Interesting statement, don't you think? However, I don't know whether or not I want to believe this one. As stated, the police returned to the site in question and didn't find a cave. Not even a single thing resembling a cave. However, we did look into the lead about the young girl who was said to be found in the caves. It took a lot of digging to validate Brazzer's claim, but we ended up finding the name of the girl and even discovered something even far more bizarre. Turns out the young girl's name is Lily, and she's been missing for almost 2 decades before the Brazzers incident. At least that's what any existing relatives related to her claim. Technically speaking, she's supposed to be 32 years old, or at least have the appearance of such. However, she looks the same as she did a child before she went missing, and that was when she was 12 years old. I'll be sure to get a statement from her, as research of the dead ends must continue.
Thank you so much for tuning into Archives of the Dead Ends podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it interesting and very mysterious. Remember, you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us on our Instagram at indie_archivist. Until next time, this is your host, Indie Archivist, signing off. Stay safe and keep listening.